Why was it important for you to bring this to life in this medium through film? Like, what sparked you to produce it in this manner?
Well, I kind of got commissioned to do it, although you would hope that if you got commissioned, then you get paid for it. But it was more like a special request. The most beautiful footage that you see of the concert was shot in 1969 with 5 cameras on 16 millimeter film, and it was shot by a crew put together by a guy named Gene Rosenthal. And because it also was on that TV show where you see Steve Allen, a brief excerpt from that, the Gene Rosenthal thought that film is not worth anything, like, because he thought he had an exclusive. Those organizers weren't always so organized.
You said that in the film a little bit.
Yes, that latter shot. Anyway, so Gene Rosenthal started thinking that he wanted to do something with that footage, like about 12 years ago. And he called up Nancy Jeffries, who you see interviewed a lot in the film, who was really the only surviving organizer. She's the one in the VW bus, so cliched, as she says. Anyway, so he called up Nancy, and she said, I think we should get a filmmaker involved with this, and I think the person who should do it is Augusta Palmer. So I couldn't say no. And then I got to see the original logs before I saw or heard anything. And then that speech that my mom makes, her only public speech, where she's saying, "Can't you just pay for your own tickets, people?" Which somehow seemed familiar because maybe I was in utero hearing that. Oh, I'm going to hear a lot more yelling like that from my mom anyway, but directed at me, not at crowds. Anyway, so I heard Gene played that for me the first time I came to look and listen to the footage, and I was like, I'm really here for this story because it's such a collective story of a lot of people coming together to try and do this. And then I was lucky enough to meet and interview a lot of people who changed my way of thinking about it, made it evolve, like Sandra Robinson and Jamie Hatley, who speak so eloquently in the film. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Mr. Carter, for you, I have a question to talk about. May you talk about the blues and how culturally significant that is and has been for African Americans and culture, and as a way of storytelling and preserving history too. I think a lot of the things that they talked about in the documentary that is real for me, even when I think about R&B and other styles of music as it's translated over the years, is that it was storytelling, it was personal. And so can you talk about that connection?
Yeah, well, I'm losing my voice. I think it's old age. But I grew up a part of the blues. I never could play well enough to perform, but there's a song that was written by, I think it was Memphis Slim, and he asked the question, everybody wonder where the blues come from, and he said, way in the woods on my daddy's sugar farm, but nobody knows that the blues is a result of an evolutionary process that began when our ancestors were brought to this country, packed like sardines in these ships. And it's my contention that the people had nothing to look forward to. Only thing they had was themselves. And it is my contention that they looked down deep into the inner recesses of themselves, their beings. And that's why not only the blues, but all of the music that black people make is so deeply personal because we lived it. I remember reading something, I don't know if it was Leroy Jones, who is now known as Amiri Baraka, but he wrote a couple of books regarding our music. The first, one of the most significant is the Blues People. But I think it was he who said that the blues is an expression of an African American outlook on the world. That's how we see the world, and it's both both simple and complex. And I could hear a lot of different things in the movie because the blues not really, you can't point to one specific place where the blues was born. The blues happened wherever we were. So they have put categories on the music that I don't necessarily agree with, but that's some people need to have a label in order to identify something that's very spiritual. And that is, I guess, one of the most significant things about the blues is that it's music from the black church. As that's how would you say that's been amalgamized into popular music, But the blues and black church music, in my opinion, is the same thing. I would venture to guess that one of the most used phrases in the blues is "Lord have mercy," and I grew up not really being a part of the blues as it's played in the juke joints. I couldn't go to a juke joint, and if you lived in my mother's house, you couldn't do that. But the blues is so it's what made me start a 6-hour program on Saturday morning from 6 a.m. until 12 noon. And I used to do that live every Saturday morning. And that was after doing a 5-hour program on Friday evenings from.
Oh yeah, you do. Yeah, you had back to back. You were going there. Yeah.
Yeah, so but the blues is just something that is hard to articulate to other people how I feel about the music. But
I definitely wanted to piggyback on the points you had and wanted to ask you as a filmmaker and then come back to you as well. One of the things I loved, and actually one of the quotes kind of stood with me when she was saying, like, every Saturday we heard the blues and she heard it all day. And it kind of used to make me think about, well, that was usually when we was helping our mom clean the house and do chores or something. But either way, put on some R&B music and it's playing, and you could hear the neighbors playing it and things like that. Can you talk about when you were interviewing people and talking with people, even from what you read from your father, talked about with your mom, like, and they talked about it in the film a lot, this sense of community that the blues brought, and not only that, but that was a part of the reason why they wanted to create this festival as well, because of the community that it brought together from all walks of life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the key things about the blues is that it is this community thing. It's a different community that you couldn't go to maybe where you'd be quiet about when you got to church on Sunday or went back to your mother's house, right? But it is a really a community form and a community where people are just enjoying life and putting that joy and survival on record, as Jamie Hatley says. And I think that these white blues fans were growing up in this time where like conformity was so intense in white society that they were just amazed that there was this community of Black Americans who, even though they were, not getting the same rights as white Americans, had formed this community that was about joy and sexuality and all the things that are kind of cool in life, or some of them anyway. There's more than that. So they really wanted to be a part of that community, and they wanted to celebrate that community. So yeah, I think that community is a lot of what it was about. But it's also really cool to hear people like Henry Nelson, who you hear talking about like front yard barbecues and stuff like that. He grew up in West Memphis and, grew up right next to a juke joint row there. So, that whole sense of community around a juke joint or a series of juke joints. Yeah.
My grandparents talk about it. If I was alive, I probably would have went myself.
Steve Allen, in the end, said that he didn't necessarily think that blues belonged to the Black community. What are your thoughts on that?
think the idea that blues doesn't belong to the black community, to black culture, is I have to watch what I say. But that was an article written in Ebony magazine. I think it was maybe in the 50s, the late 50s or mid 50s. But the contention of the article was that are black people giving away the blues? And for a long time, we were kind of abdicating our stewardship of our culture, and it was. I mean, in my household, you couldn't listen to the blues, and in fact, some people discouraged you listening to the blues, contending that it was not cultural, and I think they were referring to European culture, because the contention was that opera and the music of Chopin and Brahms, that was culture. But we were never taught that that the blues was a part of our culture, and that other music, European music, was from European musicians, and the music was beautiful because I love a lot of it, but it ain't the blues, and and when you it makes me especially proud of one of the great accomplishments that African Americans have made to world culture, because I think that the blues, this somewhat rudimentary or simple music form with 3 chord changes, in some cases no chord changes, but that has revolutionized music around the world. We have influenced, and sometimes that influence has been dominant in music all over the world. Cross culture, without, I don't want to get into a whole lot of, because I can really get worked up, but and sometimes I can get very angry about what I've seen done to our music. I guess one of the most popular movies around now is Sinners, and to me, it's a very important movie, because it kind of recapitulates what happens to music, how other people have usurped it, because the people, I guess the head vampire or the guy who represented the devil, his name was Bert, I think, somewhere in there I got Bert, but they were always trying to get in because they heard Miles Caton singing the song that he sang, which is a nice song. But anyhow, I think that movie is very important because it really shows what's happened to our music. And the thing is, music is to be shared, but then, a lot of our music has been usurped. And that would be all right if credit were given, But a lot of people I love the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, because when they came over here, the Doors, all those British groups, they told America they were being praised for the music that they had created. And they told America, we didn't create this. This is music from Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, John Lee Hooker, and that is you could actually kind of listen to histories of the blues and miss the fact that the music comes from black culture all the way, and that is another song. I wish I could sing it, but I can't sing. But it's I forget who it is. It's another piano player, but he says, "My mother had them, her mother had them, and now I got them too." And it refers to having the blues, and also it anyhow, go ahead, Kareem, because I'm.
Oh, no problem. That was
This feels similar to what's going on with rap music today. And I mean, in terms of sort of appropriating music and so on. So I'm just wondering what you feel about that and how you would relate this history to what's happening now.
Well, it still happens because if you grow up in the music like I did. Now, I didn't play, as I said, but I've been listening to music since I was 13 years old, and I'm 85 now, so that's been a long time. But it still goes on. I mean, and I don't begrudge anybody, but Johnny Winter is particularly, Johnny Winter's got a lot of his music from Muddy Waters. He played with Muddy Waters for a long time, and he appropriated a lot of what Muddy Waters did. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the music. I always tell my audiences on the radio that don't believe me or don't listen to me, listen to the music, because the history is in the music. And if you listen to it, you can't doubt it, and you can't hide. You can't hide. Well, there's no place to run, no place to hide. That's one of the things that's always bothered me since I got old enough to know what being bothered was.
Hello. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Carter. I've been listening to your show since I first started coming to Savannah in 2012, and you are a living legend. I still and Ms. Palmer, this was a fantastic show. I did want to ask you, I've heard in the past that Muddy Waters and I think Led Zeppelin had some kind of settlement with compensation. Did the same thing happen with the Reverend Wilkes?
Yeah, so he and his family did get royalties from the Rolling Stones. They changed what was printed on the album. So they got some compensation and some recognition. I think, just as he says, like, none of them got what they deserved, for the amazing music that they gave to not only to American culture, but to world culture. So he did get some payment. And I will also say that it's always so sad to me to see that title at the end that the son, John Wilkins, passed away. But John Wilkins' daughters and one granddaughter have a great band called the Wilkins Sisters Band. So, and they play a lot of the same repertoire. So that tradition is still going on.